Good tea time, my wonderful strangers! Welcome back to another sewing episode in my Crafty Handed World. If you are a fan of Walkaway Dress, I have a great news for you. Yes, it's yet another walkaway type dress. I have to apologize it took me this long. Really, I had it done in no time. But I don't know how you... Sometimes I feel like in a time warp. And before I know it, it's Christmas again. When I was doing my research last year, I stumbled over countless walkaway type dresses and I wanted to include more of them in my wardrobe. So after doing the iconic walkaway dress, I tried Saturday morning dress, which I think was quite cute. And when I was looking through my walkaway dress file folder for inspiration, I stumbled over this one called Coverall Cobbler's Apron. And I can easily imagine myself doing household chores in it or tending to my garden. I think it's much more stylish than slacks and a hoodie, even though maybe not as warm, certainly as comfortable and free. I can't wait to try it. And just a little response to the apron remarks. I think the idea of the dress and apron in one is really great. Isn't it the whole point of this type of dress? To have something simple that you can wear around the house and not too shabby to run to the market if needed. But let's get on with our wonderful, quick and easy project, shall we? Grab your tea or coffee and please join me. When shopping for a cheap 100% cotton, I bought all 4 yards of this red 56-inch wide poplin cotton they had on sale. And only after bringing it home, I realized how unconsciously similar it is to the cover picture. This should be a good sign for a successful project. I also found 3 matching buttons, 2 medium and larger one, and some fusible interfacing. I got some medium weight, lightweight and heavyweight to test. And about 6 yards of cotton bias tape. I couldn't decide on the spot, so I got both, contrasting and matching one. And of course, a matching thread in 200-yard spools, just to be sure. And the pattern, of course. As expected, I had endless trouble finding the original, and the wonderful G showed me valid results only after my dress was almost finished. But I will put a link down below for you, so you don't have to go through the drafting ordeal like me. Because of the expected cotton fabric shrinkage, I always lightly pre-wash my fabric in warm water to pre-shrink it and stabilize the color. So, while my fabric was drying, I went to my dining working table, grabbed my brown wrapping paper, rulers and markers, and started drafting. Not to bore you with the details, I'll just pinpoint the main points. I'm using the pattern envelope picture I found as my guide to see what pieces I need and what the finished dress looks like. This dress is a bit of a hybrid between the notorious walkaway dress and the Saturday morning dress. The half-circle skirt is attached to the front bodice and overlaps and buttons up in the back. The back is only a bodice that wraps around and fastens with a button at the front. Okay, I think the skirt is pretty much straightforward. I suppose it's a half-circle skirt with added overlap. On the booklet, the long skirt length is 30 inches. I added about 4 to 5 inches to my waist measure for the overlap and drafted my pattern accordingly. I'm linking a useful online skirt calculator below. As for the bodice, I'm modifying my front bodice from the Saturday morning dress, narrowing the shoulders and changing the neckline to V. Then I matched the waistline length to the extended skirt waist, and I also pre-planned the buttonholes. As for the back bodice, I modified the walkaway dress bodice, adjusting the neckline and extending the front tips for the overlap closure with the button. I noticed the extra bodice facing pieces on my pattern booklet picture so I copied appropriate sections of my drafted bodice. One continuous piece for the back bodice and 2 matching pieces for the front bodice. The last new pieces are the pockets. I love when the skirt has pockets, so I'm definitely making those. I estimated the dimensions based on the picture of the short apron, which has 12.5-inch long skirt, and the pockets reach almost to the bottom edge. When I was done drafting, I traced the final pattern on my pattern paper, which I could pin to my fabric and cut up. So let's start cutting. I usually like to start with the biggest piece, the skirt. As I said, I'm doing a half circle skirt, so I'm cutting it on a fold and double checking the waist before cutting. Then I cut both the front and the back bodices also on the fold. I like marking all the darts and seam allowances with my tracing wheel and chalk paper. I'm making sure to mark them from the wrong side of the fabric, in case the chalk is hard to wash. I also cut all the bodice lining. It was good that I marked the 2 smaller ones by seam allowance, so later I knew which one was left and right. As for the pockets, I have decided to make them lined, that is double. They can be cut on fold, or if needed, they can be pieced together with added seam allowance. I think basting is like measuring twice cutting once thing. You don't want to sew the tight machine stitch only to have to pick it apart later. So I pin and baste all the darts and shoulder seams before I tested the fit. Oops! I almost forgot to stay stitch around all the curved edges. It helps to prevent the deformation of the pieces while working on the dress. And remember to keep the bodice darts folded the right way, the waist darts towards the center, and the breast darts down. I also stay stitched and zigzagged along the skirt waistline. I'm using a longer stitch length for this, and I might have gone a bit further from the edge than I intended, but it will be fine. I can always remove the excess later. I also cut tiny notches to mark the center of the skirt waistline, bodice waistline, and the neckline, so I don't lose them. Okay, I'm test fitting on myself this time, to get hopefully a better fit. I think I'll make the neckline a bit bigger and fix up shoulder seams. Note again, always leave an extra seam allowance at the shoulders, especially when drafting. It's a lot easier to drop it or lift the bodice and the shoulders rather than adjust all the darts. But yeah, I think I can sew the darts on my machine. I'm trying to run the last 3 to 4 stitches almost parallel with the edge before exiting the fabric, to avoid pointy darts. And don't backstitch there either, just tie a knot. And now, just tediously remove the basting. Now it's time to prepare the facings. I decided to line the facings with the interfacing to reinforce them, as there will be some stress and buttonholes on them. I'm trying the stiffer one for the back bodice, where the bottom part acts as a belt and should be stable to pull snug around the waist. I cut the interfacing about 1/8 of an inch smaller than the facing and pressed it with my iron set to cotton. I use a cloth so I don't accidentally glue it to my iron. Then I let the glue cool down before handling the pieces. For the two smaller front bodice facings, I decided to use the lighter interfacing. And here is why I use a cloth between. To prevent my fabric from fraying and to secure the interfacing, I'm zigzag stitching the open sides of the facings. That's the top edge of the long piece and the inside edges of the two smaller facings. I was happy I marked the smaller facings at the beginning, so I had no problem placing them correctly and pinning them to the wrong side of my front bodice. Then I zigzag stitched along the whole bottom edge of the bodice. Then, I aligned the center marks of the long facing and the back bodice and pinned them together, so I could stitch them in place along the bottom edge. Remember to press the waist darts towards the center. I seem to be cursed with pinning the wrong way. I also hand-stitched the top edge of the long facing to the darts with a couple of stitches to hold it in place. But wait, there are pockets. I need to make those first before attaching the skirt. They can be either cut on a fold or as two separate pieces with added seam allowance. So let me do these as an example. I lay the pocket pieces the right sides together and pin them. I will sew around the edge with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, leaving the top edge open so I can later turn the pocket right side out. Then I cut the excess seam allowance to about 3/8 of an inch and miter the corners close to the seam to reduce the bulk. Now, with a lot of patience and a little bit of help from a pointy tool, like a knitting needle or a wooden skewer, I turn the pockets inside out, right side out. Then I carefully iron them flat, paying extra attention to the seams and corners. Oh right, I have two nice triangles. Now just watch out for the correct placement. I already screwed up once and had to make a whole new dress. Well, because I refused to redo them. The shorter side should be the pocket opening, not the longer side, so it needs to be finished before attaching. You can use bias tape to decorate the edge, or like me, use the contrasting thread to double top stitch the edge. I might be a bit obsessed with tying up all the loose ends before continuing. On the inside, of course. Okay, second try. I pinned the pockets to my skirt the right way, aligning the top edge of the pocket with the top edge of the skirt. The top of the pockets will actually get sewn into the waist seam. I'm leaving as much space between the pockets to have the pocket openings on my sides, in my case 8 inches, and a little more at the bottom. The bottom pocket edge is parallel to the skirt edge. I marked the pocket openings 2 3/4 of an inch from the bottom. Then I double top stitched the pockets to the skirt, leaving the openings on the sides. Now we can sew the skirt to the front bodice. I'm aligning the center notches so I can pin the bodice to the skirt first. And it's time for basting, which I like to do before sewing, so I can do another quick fitting before continuing. And it fits pretty well, so I'm committing. I also stitched the shoulder seams, trimmed the excess fabric, leaving the usual seam allowance, and zigzagged hemmed the edges. Finally, I hemmed the bottom of the skirt with my favorite grandma's technique. First, pin the hem and sew about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Then cut off the excess to about 1/8 of an inch from the seam. Turn the seam over, pin down, and stitch 3/16 of an inch from the edge. Time for the bias tape. After finding the narrower side of the bias fold, I unfolded it and aligned it to the edge facing the right sides together. I'm starting at the bottom of the skirt edge, leaving about 1 inch or so extra. I run the tape around the whole dress, pinning it in place and leaving some extra at the end. Then, I sewed it along the crease. There are a few tricks in the corners and ends that I'll share with you this time. So let's start sewing. So my first corner is at the bottom of the front bodice. It's almost a right angle corner, and it's the easiest one. I sew right to about here, backstitch, fold the tape like this, and continue sewing from the other side of the corner. And please, forgive the inconsistent bias tape color. I was filming both. I really appreciate you are still with me, my sweet strangers. If you are enjoying my sewing project, please give me your thumbs up. And don't be shy to ask questions and comment. Thank you. I continue up around the curve, thinking to keep all the darts folded in the right direction. The waist seam flips up, the breast darts flip down, and the shoulder seams are pressed open before hemming. The next corner is at the bottom of the back bodice. This one is much sharper than the first one, but it takes the same approach. The rest of the way is all we already know. It's going pretty smooth. I then checked the edges to see if the bias tape could be folded over easily. Where it didn't, I trimmed a little bit of the edge to get more room. A little tip to finish the beginnings and endings. Unfold the tape, turn it inside out, fold it over like this, and stitch through a line with the bottom skirt edge. I'm using a shorter stitch length for this, as bias tape tends to be a little loose. Now, I trim the excess end of the tape and miter the corners to reduce unnecessary bulk. Turn it over and fold it the right way over the fabric edge. It takes a bit of fiddling, but what a neat finish, don't you think so? And the same thing at the other end. As for the outer corners, I did some research, and the one technique that spoke to me best was to stitch the bias tape in the corners like so, to achieve a strong and a nice finish when turned over. To make things easier, I folded the corner with the bias tape, so I could follow the angle. The sharper the corner, the more tricky it is, but it's doable, and to me, it looks better than just leaving the fold open, which is another and simpler option. When all the corners were ready, I finished folding and pinning the bias tape along the rest of the edge. I found the invisible stitch too tricky with the bulkier edges, so I'm top stitching the tape close to the edge this time. And lastly, the neckline. Well, here I admit I was really struggling with the V-neck bias taping. I found countless tutorials, from which half was nonsense, and the other half didn't work right. So, in the end, I ended up freestyling it. I wanted to leave the bias tape in one piece, and use the inset corner to connect the ends, so there would be no other seams. I ended up using a similar approach as with the outer corner finishing. I measured the angles and sewed the ends of the bias tape together, this time by hand, so I could be more precise. I cut off the excess and carefully turned and folded the corner until the tape was in place. If you know a better way, please let me know in the comments. One more little thing, the buttons. The scariest part, at least for me. Well, in the back there are 2 buttons. To close the skirt and hold it to the bodice, which is quite practical when bending forward. And then there is one button to close the bodice in the front. See, I haven't seen the original dress or the pattern, and all I have to follow is this tiny little picture from the booklet. But I figured this. I measured the actual bodice overlap in the back, in my case 5 inches, and marked the 2 buttonholes horizontally on the left flat, about 1 inch from the waist seam, as there is a sideways pull on this part. Then, I measured the center-to-center distance between the buttonholes and transferred this measurement to the center of the back bodice. I marked the buttonholes vertically here because the pull of the skirt on the back bodice will be downwards. I started them about 1¼ inch from the bottom edge, so the bias tape would cover the waist skirt seam. But before I started sewing directly on the dress, I ran several trial buttonholes on a test piece, where I replicated the interfaced fabric layering to have the same working conditions. The test is great to make sure the button fits the hole nicely, the machine behaves, and the buttonhole is finished smoothly. Of course, after 4 successful test buttonholes and 2 successful dress buttonholes, the last and front dress buttonhole had to go screwy. It got stuck in the middle of the process, and I had to carefully undo it and make a new one. In the end, the buttonhole sewing became quite satisfying. I only need to focus more on the right placement. I'm using the seam ripper to carefully cut the holes. As for the front buttonhole, I should have sewn it first and then adjust the fit with the sewing button. I ended up with the front tip sticking out much more than I'd like to. When attaching the buttons at the back of the skirt, I realized they don't need to fit super tight, because when the back bodice wraps around the front button defines the waist. I hope you've enjoyed this video as much as I did. It was a fun ordeal for me. Thank you for watching, thank you for your thumbs up, and I hope to see you next time. And now, final reveal.
Only heart, what can you do when the one you want don't want you? Chasing love can drive you mad, make you feel real good, make you feel so sad. Oh, 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 chasing love. Oh, 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 chasing love.
The Coverall Cobbler's apron. Cobbler's Coverall Cobbler's apron. Coverall Cobbler's